Today we're going to be looking at the big question, why are American elections so long? More specifically, why is the election season feels like it goes on for over a year? When in most countries around the world, it actually only lasts a few months. So you've already probably seen it's June 2026 when I'm recording this, and already there have been articles about which Democrats are we going to see in 2028, which Republicans are going to replace Trump in 2028. Now this is over 2.5 years away, and we're already seeing the betting markets also trying to decide who is going to be the nomination on both the Democratic side and the Republican side. You can see right here on the Democratic side, we already have the frontliners or the front runners for the Democratic side with Harris, Newsom, Buttigieg, and Ocasio-Cortez. None of these people have even said that they're going to run for president. So how did it get to be this way? Because this is not random. Well, let's kind of look a little bit about our history. So let's look back at one of the past elections in 2020. So as you can see right here, dating back in 2020, Donald Trump almost immediately after the 2016 election, he of course announced that he was going to run again. And then as you can see on the Democratic side, you had candidates as early as 2017, so that's 3 years before the election, putting in their hat in the ring. John Delaney, Andrew Yang. You can see that the rest came later in January of 2019, and that's when kind of the floodgates opened. And this is really a mostly recent phenomenon. Back in 2004 was one of the first instances where you saw a candidate put their hat in the ring super early, and that was Howard Dean. So the election was in 2004, and in May 2002, he said that he was going to explore a committee or form a committee to explore becoming president, which basically means I'm going to run for president. He officially ran in June 2003, but that was very, very early. Now that accelerated in 2016. Whereas you can see right here, in 2016, we had a candidate, which was Ted Cruz, announce that they were running for president 596 days before the election.
You what?
So this is almost 2 years before the election even begins. And as you can see, in other countries, this is way longer. The United Kingdom, it's 140 days approximately back in 2015. Canada, which the 2015 was considered a long election season, that was 78 days. Mexico has a law that's 147 days. Japan has just under 2 weeks. And France typically is about 4 months or so, from January till about April. So about 4 months. Dating back to this last election, with critics were saying that Joe Biden dropped out too late, Kamala Harris didn't have enough time, and I kind of laugh at that a bit because she did still have approximately whole month of August, September, October, and a few days of November. So she had at least 3 months, which is about 90 days, which if you look at the other countries, that's pretty, that is less than usual, but that's pretty standard. That's kind of right up there with Canada and closer to France. Okay, so how did it get to be this way? Well, a couple reasons. Number one is money. Money in politics.
I like money.
And also, it's how the states run the elections. So before we get to that, let's jump back to where this all kind of began, because before the modern day, most elections were pretty much, most people did not run for president until the year of the election. Okay, so really I point to 1968 as kind of one of the turning points towards elections taking way, way longer. So in 1968, President Johnson was planning to run for a re-election, and he was very unpopular.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
And there were people in his own party that were planning to run against him. And in the United States, what happens is the political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, they create the rules to select their nominee for president. And they nominate them, and they put them in the general election. And so the Democrats have different rules than the Republicans, but they're similar. And one thing that both parties have is they typically have primaries, where a candidate has to go to different states and they have to win the primary election. Typically, if it's a Democrat, it's just Democrat voters. It's a Republican, it's just Republican voters. Now, these primaries are typically the year of the election. And typically, these are February, March. So in 1968, this is February, March, April, the spring. And what happened was, in the first few states, specifically in New Hampshire, President Johnson won the state, but just barely. And so because of this, he felt like he couldn't win the primary season, and he dropped out. So then what happened is a bunch of candidates stepped in the race. This is in March, the election's in November. Bobby Kennedy was one that joined the race. And as you can see, they had some primary elections. Now back then, not every state did a primary, or if they did a primary, it was a unofficial result, which meant that technically, even if Bobby Kennedy won California, they didn't necessarily have to vote for him at the convention. What's the whole point of this? What ends up happening is in 1968, we get a contested election. So we have these 4 people running for president. Johnson drops out in March. Kennedy is assassinated that summer. And so we have Eugene McCarthy, Hubert Humphrey, and some others as well. And we get to the night of the Democratic National Convention, and the problem is that none of the candidates have a majority of votes needed to win. So then it becomes a free-for-all where they do elections at the convention. It's kind of like a wheel and deal style. This is how traditionally parties used to elect and select their nominee, dating back to the 1800s. So this is kind of the way they did it, but it was very chaotic in 1968, and it was very public, and it was on TV, and it was a complete mess, and the Democrats end up losing that election anyways. And what we end up happening is in 1974, we get December 1974, Jimmy Carter announces he's running for president on the Democratic side. Now, Jimmy Carter, a lot of people back then would have been like, who? Who's Jimmy Carter? Governor of Georgia, a lot of people didn't know who he was. And so rather than enter the race the spring of 1976, when all these primaries are going on, he decided, I'm going to jump in early, spend all of 1975 gathering name recognition, and hopefully people will know who I am by 1976. And he goes on to win the nomination, and he eventually becomes president for one term. Moving forward to 2004, we have a similar candidate who also jumps in early, Howard Dean. A lot of people didn't know who Howard Dean was. Additionally, you have the rise of every state, besides about a few of them. Most states in the United States run primary systems. So every single one of these states has a primary. Now, where I live in Michigan, our primary for the presidency is typically, in the past couple years, has been in March. Before the last 10 years, the primaries were really spread out. So they started in February and they went all the way up to June. And that's when the parties had to decide who was going to get the most votes, who was going to be the nominee. The primaries have shrunk to only being in about 1 or 2 months. So they start in February, but most of the primaries are done by March. So by the end of March, more than 50% of the primaries are done. Back in the 1960s, it would be way less than that. They had a lot more primaries that they had to do. So the debates are also ridiculously early. For instance, the debates in 2016 started in 2015. They started in the fall of 2015 with the 2028 elections, because we're going to get a new Republican president that's not Donald Trump. We're going to have a lot of Democrats that are going to be running in, so there's going to be a lot of people debating each other. And so my big prediction is a year from now, you're going to get a lot of people who are going to put their hat in the ring, even though the election is still, by then, a year and a half away. So right here, as you can see, to earn a place on the stage of the debate, and this is the Republican debate, and the rules are different for the Democrats, but they also are similar. But as you can see, in 2023, you had to accumulate 40,000 donors and get at least 1% support in 3 national polls. So to even get on the debate stage, people have to know who you are, you have to have donors. And so this is, I would argue, this is not a good thing, because it requires you to get out there early, accumulate a lot of money, name recognition, and that's why they're joining so early. So as you can see, it's a combination of debate rules, having to get more money, having to get name recognition. It's also a result of getting ahead of the other candidates and being the first one out the gate. The rules of the states and how primary season has been squished into an earlier time frame. It's still the year of the election, but it's earlier in the year. We definitely can change it in America. Like I said, other countries do fine with 3-4 months. So that is something that we can change in the US. But in order to change that, we need to get some campaign finance laws and kind of step up that regulation would be the first big step towards that. So that's one reason, I should say several reasons, why our elections are so long in America, dating back to the 1960s, and it's more of a modern day thing. So hope you learned something with that.